have plenty of time for questions afterwards, and that sort of thing. So, welcome, and thank you for coming. It's a pretty exciting project for the city. Just by way of introductions, my name is the president of World Technical Engineering. Born and raised in Lynn. I grew up in Pine Hill. I was just mentioning to the mayor when I was a little kid, my sister took dancing lessons and they had the recital right here in England. Went to St. Mary's, 1 through 12. I got the welts to prove it. But anyway, with me is Bill Mertz. He's project director, and Alan Cloutier. He's a senior traffic engineer. But I'd also like to introduce Mayor Nicholson, as well as Aaron Clausen, the principal planner. Mayor, I don't know if you want to make a couple of remarks.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rich. Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Nicholson. I'm the mayor of Lynn. Really appreciate everyone being here to hear more about this really exciting project. Obviously, Western Ave is one of the main thoroughfares of the city, really a backbone, and it is in dire need of an upgrade. You all know, you all drive it, you all realize the urgency on this. So this is a really exciting moment for the city to really transform a major way that we get around. And I'm very grateful for the whole team that created this opportunity. And a lot of this funding is coming from the state and federal government. A lot of work from the whole team to line up the funding, to plan it all out. The folks at World Tech, our planning department, this has all been done in collaboration with the Lynn City Council. We have some councilors here, Councilor at Large Brian Field, Ward 2 Councilor Rick Starber, Ward 5 Councilor Diane Chakutis, as well as the previous administration. So I just want to thank everyone for your involvement today. Thank all of you for being here, because part of what makes these projects successful is to have the community perspective, community input, and also in your help in spreading the word about what's happening, so that we can have that broader understanding and buy-in. So really appreciate you being here and your input. And I will, unfortunately, I have other commitments, I won't be able to stay, but I just wanted to say thank you so much and turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Also with us today also is Jason Silver. Jason, want to raise your hand. He's with Regina Builder Associates. They are a public engagement firm. With projects like this, it's vitally important that we have engagement with the public to make sure that we're answering questions and they're aware of things. It is a little bit of an education process going through projects like this. At some point, and you see on the cover slide, MassDOT, we're working in concurrence with MassDOT. At the end of the day, MassDOT will administer the construction of this project. I have several slides here. I'll go through them. I'll try not to keep everybody in very late, but just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. So we have an agenda tonight. We're going to talk about the project limits. Where does the project start and end? Why are we doing it? Why are we doing this project? The purpose and need. Talk a little bit about the existing conditions. You all know what the existing conditions are, but just to highlight some of the things that we look at as the design team. And then what are we trying to accomplish? What are the project goals? What are we trying to accomplish here? Talk a little bit about the planning and design process. This is a long process, and we're going to talk about that. As I mentioned, public engagement. Talk a little bit about the funding, how the funding came about, what the funding covers, what the city's obligations are. We'll talk about that a little bit. Project schedule, and then at the end, really get your input, answer some questions that we can't answer. This is an 800-step process. We're on step 4, right? So it's going to be a while, but we want to get the input right early on. That's why we're here tonight to go over with you. So you can just see the project begins right down here at Center Street, right outside of Market Square. Continues along Western Ave. Some of the key intersections, I'll show you that in a minute, but it also includes that loop around Stop and Shop, up Franklin Street, across Boston Street, back down Washington Street. We know what that's like, right? So it includes that. As we continue up the project along Western Ave, Maple Street, where it comes out near Bayview, and then once we get right close by right here, it includes the Chestnut Street intersection, and then down to the Maple Street and Chestnut Street intersection. All that kind of works together. And then as we continue up all the way to Eastern Ave, that loop around portions of Wake, and then Eastern, and then we don't quite get to the roundabout down here, but certainly the legs of the intersection. So you can see It's a pretty extensive project. It's about 10,000 linear feet, so it's almost 2 miles. Some of the key locations on the project, obviously you can see where the traffic signals are. Those are all signalized intersections. We're also going to look at things like the intersection of Park Street. We all know what that's like as well. A lot of traffic is one way, but certainly a lot of traffic. I used to live in Park Street. Actually, I was born in Park Street. Well, not born in Union Hospital, because that's not there. Any case, you know, all my history. But all of these signalized intersections, key locations, signalized intersection at Wade and Western Ave, but also there's no signal at Eastern Ave at Western Ave. How many of you had an easy job getting out of there? Nobody, right? So that's why we're looking at that. Likely signalized intersection here, but where we have signalized intersections that are close by to each other, those are all coordinated together so that they work together so that we're getting good progression along the corridor. Alan's our senior traffic engineer at World Tech, and if we have questions about that later, Alan can go over those with you as well. Oops, So again, purpose and need, why are we doing this? There are several high crash locations that have been identified by MassDOT along the corridor. The pavement condition is poor. Traffic signal coordination, you get a green light and you stop at the next light, right? And then you stop at the next light. Having sort of great progression going down the street. ADA compliance is pretty much non-existent. Drainage system improvements, streetscape and lighting enhancements where we can do that. Consolidating bus stop locations, enhancing bus stop locations. We'll be working with the MBTA to coordinate improvements from their perspective. We'll be doing that early on. And really, this is a complete streets project. So what does that mean? We're accommodating all users, right? So it's vehicles, it's pedestrians, it's bicycles, and it's transit, all of that. And that's part of MassDOT's healthy transportation policy. Also, as part of that, enhancing bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. We know that right now we have the Northern Strand coming through Lynn. More and more commuters are using bicycles now. Western Ave doesn't really accommodate that, and so we want to make sure that we're incorporating that as well. Some of the existing conditions, you heard me talk about the high crash locations, right? So these blue areas are pedestrian crash clusters. These purple areas are just ASIP locations. That means Highway Safety Improvement Program. That's been identified as high crash occurrence locations. And you can see where they are. And then you can see top 200. So MassDOT identifies high crash intersections. They have a list of the worst 200 intersections in the Commonwealth. And several of them are located on Western Ave. And so that will be addressed as part of this as well. Similarly, the pavement condition, and we took this off the MassDOT road inventory file, and you can see that this red is poor pavement, and I don't have to tell you that. Right? Poor pavement condition, especially around Boston Street, around Washington, Franklin Street, these parts of Western Ave. There's a couple of places that are in fair condition. There's one place that's in good condition, which is right down here near Eastern Avenue. The rest of it is fair, so you can see it's fair to poor condition throughout the corridor. Western Ave is a heavy transit route. You can see all of the MBTA transit routes. Several of them go down Western Ave. So it's going to be important to enhance transit opportunities along Western Ave with bus stops, working with the MBTA on things like transit signal priority, which allows the buses to get through more easily. And so that'll be part of it as well. But this just gives you an idea of all the bus routes, the 7 bus routes that are either on Western Ave or in proximity to Western Ave. We also did a parking inventory because we know that's going to be really important to a lot of the businesses along Western Ave. And you can see by this map, and the colors don't show up that great, but you can see where these red bars are. And this is the midday analysis, but you can see where these red bars are. That's greater than 90% occupancy, whereas you can see in other areas the occupancy isn't that great. So this is going to be a balance. And when we talk about these projects, because there's so many competing interests, it's really about balance. Can we make the corridor just for bicycles? No. Can we make the corridor just for transit? No. Can we make it just for vehicles? No. It has to be a balance, and that's that's why we do this analysis that we do. And so again, this is the midday analysis. We also did an evening analysis. You can see how that changes with the occupancy. I mean, it's really, really high occupancy, more high occupancy on the car at night. So we have an idea of what that is. Where can we balance this? Because we don't want to take parking away, but we're at the same time going to have to accommodate bikes and bicycles, as well as transit stops. And a lot of times when we do the parking inventory, we find that some of the parking that's out there that we're eliminating was illegal in the first place. Too close to a corner, next to somebody's driveway, things like that. So we take all of that into account as we start going through our design process. Existing conditions, as I mentioned, this is a regional arterial roadway, poor pavement condition, minimal curb reveal, paved markings that are either faded or not standard markings, utility trenches all around the place, bicycle accommodation is non-existent, insufficient transit amenities, so you can see that. And again, I can say, you know, we live here, I grew up here, but it's I'm preaching to the choir. You folks know what this is like. So again, just some pictures to show what we're talking about in terms of, and I believe this is probably right by Stop and Shop on Western Ave, but you can see the pavement condition. It's either tripping hazards, or broken concrete, or a combination of concrete, and so we put some asphalt in it to keep it smooth. You can see in the bottom photo right here, lack of handicap accessibility. All of these kinds of things are what will be included in this project. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the project will include in a few minutes. Again, pavement deterioration, roadway drainage, all needs to be upgraded as part of the project. Traffic efficiencies at the intersections, we just talked about that. This one, as you know, is right down the street. This is the Chestnut Street. A lot of vehicles, a lot of traffic, not well coordinated. The signal equipment is outdated. So again, existing conditions that we all know. In other areas too, various sidewalk conditions in width. Some places the sidewalks wider, some places are narrow. We want to make all of that consistent. As I mentioned, minimum curb reveal, bike-sided equipment, safety. Vertical granite curb is considered barrier curb. It does help for those cars that might be a little too close. Keep them off the sidewalk. And then you've limited or inconsistent bicycle accommodation. I don't think any bike lanes right now on Western Ave. So the project goals, as I mentioned, complete street to better accommodate all users and prioritize the most vulnerable. Those folks that are not as mobile as others, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing the improvements for them as well. Providing safety and operational improvements, signal upgrades like lane assignments, turn lanes, all of those things, signal timing optimization, safety and access, as I mentioned, for pedestrians. And I said, complete reconstruction of the roadway. New pavement, new drainage, new curbing, new sidewalks, new traffic signals, streetscape amenities. I mean, this is the Cadillac of improvements, and in a minute you'll see the price tag. And then, of course, ADA compliance for sidewalks, signals, and handicap ramps. Improve transit amenities. What does that mean, too? Well, transit signal priority, as I mentioned, so the buses can get through better, but also shelters, bus shelters, and benches, providing enhanced transit amenities for those folks who take the bus every day. Preserve on-street parking to the greatest extent we can. Will some parking be eliminated? Sure. But we want to make sure that we're keeping a balance of parking and bike lanes and all those other things that we need to fit into the project. And as I mentioned, enhanced streetscape. Part of this project will include streetscape, trees and benches and placemaking and things like that. So, and as I mentioned, we want to accommodate all the users, and that is part of MassDOT's health and transportation policy. As we go through this, there's been a lot of work that's already been done. We're going to, back in 2016, MassDOT conducted a study of Route 107. That went from Chestnut Street into Salem. There was also, we completed in 2018 and updated it in 2021, a functional design report, which is an extensive traffic study of the entire corridor. And we look at all sorts of things, accidents, capacity, and all sorts of things that's included in that. And then there was a road safety audit that was required whenever there are 8 SIP locations on a project. MassDOT requires a roadway safety audit, and so that was completed. That's this document right here. And again, we're looking at all of these things so we can get really a good understanding of what the necessities are out there and what's needed. And again, I'll say it again, balancing the needs of the corridor. Part of the plan, the design, as I mentioned, adding some of these new features to the roadway, turn lanes, dedicated turn lanes, improving drainage, new signal equipment, which include things like auto push buttons, for example, for pedestrians, and things like that. Enhancing pedestrian accommodation and ADA compliance, concrete sidewalks, as I mentioned, making the curb reveal consistent at 6 inches. There's a lot of places along Western Ave, it's almost flush with the roadway. Curb extensions at sidewalk locations to make those crossing distances shorter, where we can do that. And in some locations, to assist in crossing, implementing rapid flashing beacons, where we don't have signalized intersections. So for example, from Park Street to Franklin Street is just sort of a straight run. But we know we have, there's a playground up there, there's some other areas where pedestrians may want to cross. If we're identifying some of those locations that would require enhanced safety for crossing, that's where we might include a flashing beacon. Again, installing bike lanes and consolidating bus stops where we can. We'll be working with the MBTA early on in this process. Providing ADA accessible bus stops as well, and bus shelters, like, as I mentioned, in specific locations. And providing improved transit operations, and that might be transit signal priority, might include queue-jump lanes. We don't know what that's going to be yet, because again, as part of this balancing of the corridor, we need to know what we have in terms of right-of-way and how much can we fit within that right-of-way that we have. So these are the things that we'll be looking at. Shared bus bike lanes, for example. And then, as I mentioned, enhanced streetscape. And I'll talk a little bit about the review process. This project will have a lot of public engagement. We hope the public will be engaged with the project. We want the public's input. This is a city project, but you all live in the city. So to the extent we can tailor this thing to the specific needs of the city, we want to try and do that. Having said that, we still have to fall within certain design guidelines and things of that nature. But we want to get this project in front of the public. And it's great to see the councils here tonight. That's awesome, because you guys are obviously going to be the voice of the project as well. So again, the process will be meeting with municipal leaders, meeting with stakeholders. Part of this process is education and guidance. Because we always get like, well, we want you to fix it, but don't change anything. Or why can't we do this? Or why can't we do that? It's up to us to help you understand how this process works, right? And so there's a lot of education and guidance that we're looking for. We're developing a website. Aaron, I don't know if you want to talk about the website.
Sure. I'm Aaron Clausen, the city planner. As Rich pointed out, public engagement is a really important part of the planning and design aspect of reconstruction of the corridor. So the planning department has created a web page, essentially a project page for a number of the different projects going on in the city right now. One of them is just gone live tonight for this project, and it's lynncommon.com, and then there's a project page for Western Ave. That's a great place to get just an overview of the project itself. A lot of the details that Rich already talked about, that is described in a little bit more detail there. You can actually get the documents that Rich has referenced, like the functional design report, that 400-page tome. If you want to dig into that and get into the details, that's available there. The slide deck will be available. And I would encourage you to if you're interested, to log on to that. You can sign up to get updates as the project progresses. In addition to these in-person meetings, our goal is to create a variety of modes or points of access. We'll have a presentation that will be recorded that we'll make available there. So as this progresses, that's a great place to get latest information, because this is going to be a several-year design process. I'm not going to get in front of you on your timeline, but it's a a several-year design process, and it's really important to stay engaged from this really early stage all the way to implementation.
Thanks, Jason, I don't know if you want to add anything?
I think you hit the important pieces. I think that, the engagement piece will be extensive in this project, and the more feedback we receive, the better the project will be. So, with that in mind, we do have sign-up sheets in front. If you haven't signed in and you want to get regular updates, please sign in with your email address. And we'll be in front of you a lot more as the project goes on.
Excellent. So the project fund, so we'll talk a little bit about the funding process. How did we get this project to where it is? So the city submitted a project initiation form to MassDOT back in 2018. My phone's going off for some reason. I don't know why. So they submitted the project back in September of 2018. It was received by MassDOT and approved as eligible for funding. And what that means is that the project can now move forward to the city's side to start their design process, but also it makes the project eligible for 100% construction funding. So this project will be built with no city money. The city's obligation, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is the design process, and that'll be on the next slide. The important thing to know about this project right now is that about a week and a half ago, the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization included this project in the FY 2027 TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. And while MassDOT approves the project as eligible for funding, nothing happens until the NPO includes the project on the State Transportation Improvement Program. So you can have a project that MassDOT will support, but it will never get built unless the NPO includes it on the TIP. A week and a half ago, the NPO included this project for the 2027 TIP for $47.9 million. It's a mega project. It's a mega project. Out of that $47.9 million, that's all construction, for construction funding. It's 80% federal funds and 20% state funds. You'll note there's no city funds as part of construction. What's important about the TIP, it's a fiscally constrained program, meaning the TIP can't have more projects than they have money for. As I mentioned, 80-20, the design has to be, some of the caveats to this, the design has to be completed in concurrence with MassDOT policies and engineering directives and engineering criteria. There's design reviews by MassDOT. The city is obligated to fund the engineering, the design, right away, and any permitting that's necessary. That's the city's obligation for the project. It's a very extensive review process. We are right now in the preliminary design, the 25% design. There are several design submissions, 25% design, 75% design, and Aaron was just talking about this, long process, 100% design, and then plan specs and estimates, right? You have to have an approved design, you have to have a clear right-of-way, permits have to be in place, and the project has to be programmed. The project's programmed, we're in the design process right now. Things like right-of-way come a little bit later, but this is the process. One of the things I want to say about design reviews, so when this project goes to MassDOT for, say, their 25% review, it doesn't go to one person. It goes to several departments. It goes to right-of-way. It goes to traffic. It goes to highway design. It goes to environmental. It goes to the landscape section. It goes to several sections at MassDOT in Boston and at their district office in Arlington. So there's a lot of people looking at this thing when it goes in for reviews. So it's, as I said, it's a very extensive review process. As I mentioned, municipal requirements, design, environmental permitting, and right-of-way. It has to meet MassDOT design criteria. As we mentioned, this is a complete street project, so it has to meet MassDOT's Healthy Transportation Policy Directive. I just mentioned the reviews. The first phase of this project will culminate at the MassDOT official design public hearing, and that's once the 25% design phase has been approved. MassDOT will then hold an official design public hearing The city will host it, but it's a MassDOT hearing on this project. What we like to do, especially at World Tech, is we like to have meetings like this all through the design phase. Not only just preliminary design, but as we go through the design phase, because we want to make sure that we're answering as many questions as possible, that the public has an understanding of the project and what's involved with the project and all those sorts of things. So that when MassDOT comes to do the design public hearing, we have a room full of people that can't wait for the project to start, right? That are supportive of the project. And that goes for some of our local leaders in the city as well, that we've answered all those questions, that the preliminary design is really being tailored to the city, and that there's a lot of support for the project. Having said that, the path to advertising and construction, as I mentioned, the project needs to be maintained on the tip, which we have no doubt that it will. We have to meet the design schedules and milestones. Some of the things that MassDOT looks at as the design goes through, and we have to submit a schedule monthly, an updated schedule to MassDOT. And this schedule is, how many pages, Bill? 8 or 9 pages? It's every aspect of the project in minute detail, right? But some of the things that MassDOT looks at are, we have design conflicts, are there design changes? One of the things that the MPO is always concerned about is scope creep. You know, we're going from 7th Street to Eastern Ave. Well, the next thing you know, we're going down Franklin Street and we're at the Commons, and by the time we're done, we're at the Linway. That's one of the things that we have to keep in mind. There is limited funds for the project, and at the same time, we need to keep the scope of work as to what was approved initially by the PRC. They look at things like the design quality, permits, right-of-way. That'll be on a project of this magnitude. Right-of-way will be extensive, and when I say right-of-way, things like temporary easements. And just to give you an idea of what that means, the contractor is building a sidewalk. He needs to step on somebody's property so he can nail the form in for the sidewalk. Just that step on the property, we need a construction easement. Federal highway requires that. So it's things like that. Again, is it a major hurdle? No, it just takes time. Usually that process starts during the latter part of the 75% design phase. So that's a little ways away. And then one of the things that DOT also looks at is public opposition. If they come out for the design public hearing and a room's filled with people with spears and war paint, they don't feel too good about that. So we want to make sure that we've answered as many questions as possible as we go through the process. One of the opportunities with a project like this, and I'm glad that we have some of the councils here tonight, is non-participating work versus participating work. Well, what does that mean? Participating work is all of those things that I told you were included in the project, sidewalks and paving and all those things. Non-participating work are things that the city may want to include with the project because it's part of a bigger project, and they get the benefit of the road being open. So for example, let's say we need to replace the water main because it's 150 years old. This is an opportunity to do that. The city would have to establish, or in this case, number one, the sewer would have to establish a force account with MassDOT, but that work can be included with the project. We have a project in Everett right now, it's $33 million reconstruction of Ferry Street. They're including a replacement of their water main as part of that project. So it provides a cost benefit because it's part of the bigger project. So those are things, some of the things that might be non-participating work, things like betterments and things like that. Or if the city, if there are certain streetscape upgrades, MassDOT is going to include a certain amount of streetscape upgrades. There's some things that the city may want to enhance. Well, those things may end up being non-participating because they're not eligible for funding. So it's things like that. Project schedule, the planning phase we're through with. You heard me talk about that. The road safety audit, we did some public outreach. I know Council Sauber was hosted one of those down at the police station early on. Right now, as you can see, we're in the preliminary design phase right here. And then once we get through the MassDOT design public hearing, we'll move on to the final design phase. What's included with the preliminary design phase? Well, the topographic survey and base plans, that has been completed. We finished with that. We started with our pre-25 design scoping meeting with MassDOT. I believe that there'll be more of that to come just to identify some of the matters that have come up between us as the design team and MassDOT, so that we're all on the same page. There's a document called the Design Justification Workbook. Any part of this project where we cannot comply with MassDOT standard, we have to include that in the Design Justification Workbook, and that has to be approved by DOT. So let's say, for example, we can't put a bike lane in. That has to be justified. They want to know why. And so there's a process that goes with that. Really, the reason I have the next bullet highlighted is the preliminary design is really developing the horizontal and vertical alignment of the corridor. So a lot of people will be saying, like, so where are you going to put the benches? And where are the trees going? We don't get to that until after the preliminary design. Really, the preliminary design phase is establishing horizontal and vertical alignment. Are we looking at other things? Sure. Are we looking at traffic signal, general sequence and timing kind of things? We're looking at all of that stuff. But it's really horizontal and vertical alignment. That is what we're establishing. Once we finish with that, then it's pedal to the metal. The arithmetic on the drawings, right, to simplify it. There'll be, as I mentioned, agency coordination with the MBTA is going to be key here. We're doing a project right now in Watertown, a major bus route. They actually have the buses, the electrified buses out there, and there's catenary poles and all this other stuff. So it'll be important to coordinate with the MBTA on this because there's several bus routes there. How can we enhance transit on the corridor? Utility coordination would be very important as part of this process to be coordinating with Lynn Water and Sewer. This project will include a complete upgrade to the drainage system. Lynn Water and Sewer manages the drainage systems. It's going to be a major benefit for them. But we're going to have to coordinate any other utility work that goes out there. In addition to that, when the preliminary design is done, MassDOT sends the preliminary design to every utility provider on Western Ave. Gas, electric, cable, anything that's out there. And it's really raising the awareness that there's this major project coming. And if you have utility upgrades that you're thinking about, you need to be thinking about it now because there'll be a 5-year moratorium on this roadway when it's done. So we want to, how often do we see brand new paving and then 3 weeks later there's someone out there digging it up to fix something? Well, this will be an opportunity for the utility providers to get out there and do any necessary work that they need to do. One of the other things, yes?
Sorry, just on that, how soon are they notified so that they can work it into their budget?
They're notified, well, when we submit the 25% design phase, once that's approved, MassDOT's utility section will send that to all the utility providers. So it's probably a couple of years at least in advance of when the project comes. And the other important part of that is MassDOT has an incentive for the utility providers. They will pay 50% of the utility relocation cost if the utility provider gets their stuff out of the way within a certain time, within the schedule. So that's an incentive for them. If you have, if they have to replace boom poles or whatever that is, it's a $4 million cost to them. If they get this stuff done timely, they get half that money back, which is a benefit.
Yeah, Richard, if I could just real briefly on that question, there's already been coordination with Lynn Water and Sewer so that they know this project is coming and to kind of build it into their capital plan so that they can benefit from some of the improvements to the street, so the water lines, the sewer lines, and the drain lines can be all done. So that coordination has already happened.
Was there any ordinance that through like Western Ave to reach outside communities like the WRA?
I don't know if the MWRA is affected in this case.
So again, all of those utility providers will be notified. I believe that MWRA may have assets in that roadway. That whoever's there will be notified. Yeah. Because again, we're not going to spend $48 million on a project and then have the thing dug up. As I mentioned, public engagement throughout this process. So this is sort of the kickoff to this. We'll be having more of this. And then, of course, the preliminary design will culminate with the official MassDOT design public hearing. So, what's possible on Western Ave? I'm going to allow Alan to kind of go through some of the concepts that we created during the planning phase, during the funding phase, just, you know, things that you think about, because people ask the question, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? And some things we have thought about, and that will potentially move forward, and there's other things that may not. So, Alan, I'll let you do it.
We're going to share some of these with you tonight, but probably also, maybe even more important, have something else to write a book. So that way, you know, if you guys have any concerns, feedback that you have on any of the concepts, feel free to share them with us. If you're shy and want to just kind of ask me on the side or whatever, feel free. So we're going to show 3 alternatives that we were looking at, we were reviewing. And this is just at one intersection, we're not going to go along the entire corridor because, well, we haven't got to that level yet. You know, we haven't designed everything. This was based off the survey, though, so at least we know what fits. That is a little more accurate than going based off the area. So, alternative 1, and I'll zoom to the next slide so we can do a little bit more. At a number of the intersections, we're looking at doing left turn pockets when we can. That's going to be kind of a process as we go through too, because you mentioned the parking study that was done earlier. Sometimes that's kind of where there's going to be a conflict. Generally, we're not wiping out, you know, huge swaths. You know, we're not taking out parking on the entire outside of the road or anything like that, because we know parking is important along this corridor. But when we deal with MTA buses, any turn pockets, that'll be kind of a process that we're going to be working through quite a bit. So alternative 1, we looked at putting on-road bike lanes onto Western Avenue, which is, the next part. Kate kind of gave away my the results. I'll go to the next one anyway. Just kind of a zoomed in cross section for what alternative 1 would be that we were looking at was essentially keeping the sidewalks about where they were, keeping the parking lane, and fitting an on-road 5-foot wide bike lane, along with 2 11-foot wide travel lanes. Putting in a bike lane is a requirement of the MassDOT Health and Transportation Directive. However, this road is also, it's a busy roadway. Anything over 10,000 vehicles per day needs to have not just lanes, but either buffered bike lanes or some kind of step-up accommodations for bicyclists. This, as we showed, does not have a room for a buffered bike lane. So we actually already talked to MassDOT, the police streets group, and they already kind of said, that's not going to fly, because we're at 18,000 vehicles per day. This corridor shows a high likelihood of bicycling. You know, there's definitely, or I forget the actual title of what it was for bicycling. So we've kind of already been told this isn't really going to go very far if we try submitting something like this. So then we go to alternative 2. So alternative 2, similar to 1. So we still have on-road bike lanes, essentially putting in a straight buffer between the vehicles traveling, the bicyclists, still having on-road parking at some locations, you know, where we're trying to put in a crosswalk or we're getting close to a street. If it's not signalized, you know, maybe we have that ability to put in curb extensions, which curb extensions are great because they reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians. They also improve the visibility of pedestrians. If you're driving, rather than pedestrians being far back behind parked cars, they're kind of out where you can see them a lot more. They provide a lot more space to, you know, also when you're trying to fit in ADA, trying to make sure your ramps aren't too steep. It gives you a lot more room to work with to make sure that you can actually meet those requirements. So with this alternative, we can kind of zoom in the next one. Is we have a 5-foot on-road bike lane. This, however, requires us to make some modifications to the sidewalk. And this one we call it alternative 2B. We did have an alternative 2A, which I'm just going to show because it's not much different. Was that we kept the sidewalks the same, both 8 feet. Things that we're looking at as we're moving forward is even stuff like utility poles. Where are they? How much of those would you have to relocate? This one we did 2B just because we wouldn't have to relocate, you know, 200 utility poles. You know, to really think about when it's the cross section, when you multiply multiply the cost of relocating the utility pole times a couple hundred, it gets pretty expensive. Still might happen. So here would provide a 2-foot buffer between, again, the moving vehicles and the bicyclists. Still provide parking and then have a sidewalk. And then we decided we were feeling, I guess, kind of bold, so we decided to do something crazy, or something, I guess, stepped up a little bit more for the bicyclists. And we were also looking at doing, what if we tried to put in a separated bike lane? So really, and we still are kind of did a little bit with our total room that we have curb to curb. I mean, I wish we had, another 10, 20 feet to work with, we'd be able to come up with something great. So this was, if we took all the bikes and we gave them their own facility on one side of the road, what could we fit in? So here we picked the south. One thing that you do always worry about this is just, a lot of curb cuts. How many curb cuts do you have? Because every curb cut is a conflict point in the driveway. So we want to see what we fit in. So if we want to try to fit this in, we could fit in a 2-way separated bike lane on one side of the road. It would be narrow, it's 8 feet wide. So it's a little on the narrower side. Of course, it's only bikes. Pedestrians still have their own space. They have a separate sidewalk, so you don't have the bike pedestrian interaction, which can be a concern when you're in an urban area. When you're a lot more rural, that's when you put in a shared use path, and if volumes are low enough for both, it's not so much an issue. But once you get a little bit more urban, it's great, you can separate the bicyclists from the pedestrians. So this was kind of an alternative we're looking at as well. Nothing's been decided yet. I guess that's kind of a main point I want to get. And we'd like to hear your concerns. And if you particularly like something, let us know that, of course, too.
I think that's it, Al.
And I think that's the discussion and input,
So a lot of what Al was talking about as well is not necessarily one size fits all. This is a long corridor. We're going from Market Square all the way to Eastern Ave. So it's not necessarily one size fits all. There may be different segments of Western Ave that are going to have a different treatment, a different process. And that's something that we have to go through as we start going through the preliminary design phase, and we're looking at that horizontal alignment. How does everything fit? A lot of times too, we're trying to fit 10 pounds in a 1-pound bag, right? We have all of these things that we need to do, all of these users that need to be accommodated. And so it'll be important to, again, work with the city leaders, work with the residents and businesses to come up with something that works, while at the same time is going to satisfy the requirements of the design requirements of a project like this. And as I mentioned, MassDOT and the Healthy Policy Directive is very, very important in all of these projects. And so that's why we have to try and accommodate these things to the greatest extent we can. So we have time for like 80 or 90 questions. So, and I'd like to go to the council first. Did any of you have any comment that you'd like to make tonight, or any questions that you have specifically?
No, so when do you expect shoveling the dirt, one, and where do you anticipate it beginning? Is it going to begin on the Westland side or at Buchanan Bridge? Or both ends and meet in the middle?
So, I have a bunch of slides on the funding process.
2027.
What's that?
It is.
Did I skip right by it?
No, it's 2027, yeah.
No, I know that, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the funding, how the funding works. But the project's on the 2027 tip, which means that the project can be advertised anytime after October 1st of 26, right? October 1st of 26. MassDOT advertises projects in each quarter of the year. They don't like to advertise in the last quarter of the year. So it's very important that this project remains in the program year on the tip. So if I had a guess, and again, a project of this magnitude, but if I had a guess, the project would likely be advertised in the spring of 27. MassDOT has a certain period of time that they have to award the contract to the contractor. So it would probably be shovels in the ground the summer of 27, worst case. Contract is let to the contractor in the fall of 27. Now, someone say, gee, 2027, that's a long time from now. It's not really. I mean, 4 years for a project like this going through the design process, that's pretty quick, actually. But I would say probably sometime around in 2027, the summer, fall of 2027.
I think the outside, are they gonna start at one side or the other?
That will be up to the contractor and DOT. So, the Ferry Street project in Everett, a similar project, about as long and almost as much. They are doing utility work right now on that project. They're replacing their water main, as I mentioned. So they're doing that water main replacement first. Utility work is generally the first thing that starts the project. And so that'll be up to the contractor and MassDOT. Generally, they don't want the whole thing disrupted, because one of the parts of this project is the contractor and us as the designer. They have to maintain traffic on the corridor, especially something like this where it's a major spine of the city. They can't shut the road down, so they have to maintain bi-directional traffic, and there have to be all kinds of traffic management plans that are reviewed and approved, and so they're not going to, I mean, is it long enough that they can be working, say, down on the Center Street end in Market Square, and then be doing some stuff up by Eastern Ave? I suppose, but that'll be up to the contractor and MassDOT when the time comes.
Thank you.
They will need some approvals and stuff, so they can't, and there are certain requirements that we can put in, like they can't just rip up 1.9 miles of sidewalk and let it go empty until they get around to it. So there could be requirements that they can only work on, so many feet of, say, sidewalk at a time. Usually want to give them a lot of flexibility because then they can get it done faster, but not too much.
Councilors, anything else? Yes.
I have to leave for a meeting, so I just have two quick questions. Just for here, I know Lynn Community Television has been covering a lot of these important events around the city to broadcast it to the entire population. And obviously, with a little over 1,000 people here, with the 100,000 plus people that we have in the city, Lynn Community Television. Are there any other media outlets here? Is the item here covering? Anybody from the item? No? Okay, that's unfortunate. One of the questions I had, on a project this size, with your experience in past projects, utilities you mentioned, as far as like sinking the utilities off the poles into the ground, is that something that you see happening in other projects where it's ornamental lights and everything's underground, so if there's a car accident, snaps the pole, it doesn't put out everybody with, without power that you're on the grid. Do you see that happening in other projects?
If I had a dime for every time we get that question, can we bury utilities? Generally not. It's extremely expensive. And just putting the wires on the ground is not the expensive part. Of course, you have transformers and all that other stuff. The real expensive part is the service connections to a building. So let's say we're running a service connection to a house and they only have a 60 amp service. The city is required to upgrade that service because 60 amps is not compliant. So generally, that is not included in the project. In my entire career, we did a P-WIT project many years ago in Monterey. That's the only one I remember where we buried utilities.
And I'm glad I'm asking a popular question.
Yeah,
it's a very good question, and it's sort of unfortunate that it's sort of not an option, because I think particularly for Western Ave, it's a very constrained corridor, and you all know it's not really that wide, and as Rich made abundantly clear, there's a lot to try to pack into that space. And part of the challenge is not just the dimension of the width, the 60 feet plus or minus that they have to work with. There's now utility poles taking up a good 3 to 4 feet, but also just literally 3 or 4 feet, but also kind of thinking pragmatically what that means in terms of the sidewalk. So it actually really does have an effect on how well the street works for all users, pedestrians, and trying to cram it all in. So I think it's something we want to think about at this early stage and continuing the conversation with MassDOT. It's certainly it's a long shot, but I think it's an important question, particularly in this context.
And I think MassDOT gets that question all the time as well. I mean, it's a popular question. I think every hearing we're at, we get that question.
I'd say we probably average about 4 poles go down Western Ave a year,
Right.
at least.
There's other benefits, right? Resiliency.
Yeah, they're constantly getting whacked.
I mean, you see it downtown too, if it could get over.
And you know, the other thing too is the coordination, because a lot of these poles have a ton of stuff on them. They have cable, they have, you know, Eversource, they have National Grid, there's a lot of providers on that. And the coordination with that is usually a big hurdle as well. You know, you'll get, and you'll often see the power company come off, they take this stuff off, and then they cut the pole. And then we're waiting for like Verizon to come out and move their stuff. And, you know, and there's a lot of this stuff. Well, I'm waiting on the other guy, and you know.
Right.
It's a coordination challenge for sure. Anyone else have a use map?
I don't know if I missed it, but you had a study done midday and evening. Was there a study done in the morning? Because Western Ave, I work in Malden and I have to be there at 7:30. So I have to leave my house at least 50 minutes ahead of time to be at, you know, in my parking spot. So I understand that you had it midday and evening.
That was
specifically for parking.
That was
Oh, just for parking.
Oh, yeah,
So we did it morning and afternoon,
Yeah.
evening.
Then my other question was, they're including the bike lanes. A lot of Western Avenue, people branch over to the right to take it right. Are they still going to accommodate that, or you're going to be in one lane of traffic, having to wait to get up to that corner? Because with all the apartments and things that are being built, they're not going to be bikes, because we have more winter days here in Lynn than we do spring and summer. So people are going to be in automobiles, they're going to be in Ubers, and the traffic is just going to be crazy with the 700 plus apartments that are going to be in existence by the time this is done.
So a couple things. The traffic study is a comprehensive traffic study. The slide I had there was we had done a parking inventory just to see where people were parking and what the turnover was during the day and evening. But the traffic study itself includes morning peak hours between 7 and 9 a.m. Thanks, Counselor. Morning peak hours between 7 and 9 a.m. and evening between 4 and 6 p.m. when everybody's commuting. And so that's generally when we collect data, and that's when we do our analysis. Relative to the bike lanes and intersections, there are specific guidelines and treatments for how bike lanes go through an intersection. So if there is say a right turn lane, and you know we have a bike lane, a buffered bike lane, and it's coming into the intersection, but there's a right turn lane, there are specific treatments on how we accommodate the bicyclists as they're coming into the intersection. Now, I don't know if you want to expand.
Yeah, but in general, you mentioned now people are kind of sliding over.
Yes.
We don't want that, though.
Western and Chestnut, a lot of
Yeah,
people
but-
take that right to go up to Broadway or whatever, and they start way back,
Yeah.
coming into the right, and it keeps the flow of traffic going, because we don't have the left at the corner, you know, it's all one lane, so people do start bridging that.
So we're going to try to generally is to really define what the lanes are right now. Because right now it's just kind of wide out there, right? You know, it's, where's the lane? You know, you kind of can slide over. But you see the amount of crashes along Western Avenue is astronomical. As Rich pointed out, there's 4 of them in the top 200 in the state. Now, that's not a list you want to be on. And a lot of that is that you don't have those defined traffic lanes. So we're going to really try to define it. We're going to try to add in some left turn pockets so that the throughs aren't getting stuck behind left turners, where we can do that. But yeah, if it's coming up, you're going to have one lane. It's not going to be kind of wide for that right turner to sneak by. It's going to be a lane till you're at the intersection, and you're going to have to take your turn at, you know, 20 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, not at, you know, 30 or something like that.
What's the APT? What's it?
Yeah, the AT is around 18,000 varies depending on the corridor.
18,000 cars a day.
Yeah, but by the time you're done there, we have tons of apartments being built all over the city. Every bit of land that is available, they're putting an apartment with underground parking. And each of those apartments are going to have one car. So we're adding 700 more cars potentially. Well, and that's just, I don't even know by the time this is done, what other projects are getting approved.
Yeah, it's a busy road, so really trying to balance everything. In fact, maybe I'll need to have you on my side when, if we're trying to balance between the left turn pocket and, if we're moving parking.
The thing is,
because-
coming from Salem, the majority of things are to your right.
Yeah.
Businesses, the highways, various things. The left is more like residential if you're coming from Salem. It would be the opposite if you're coming from India, things would be for your left.
So
Yeah.
one other thing too to keep in mind, when we do the traffic analysis and we're determining what the capacity requirements are going to be, we have to do traffic projections as well. So it's not just what we've collected, but we'll do traffic projections and we're using 10 or 15.
We had used 10, although by the time this thing gets moving.
Yeah.
We're
So
gonna have to go even further.
we'll project traffic out 10 years based on regional growth in the area. So it's not so, because what we want is when the road is finally constructed and open to traffic, it's not obsolete, right? So we want to make sure we're projecting traffic out, so that we're accommodating this.
Rich, I just had that one thing. So one thing about a lot of these projects is, Rich talked about, competing needs, bikes and transit and vehicles. Just to point to, kind of managing expectations. When this project is done, it's not like Western Ave is going to be free flowing and everyone's just be kind of going all the time. So, because there's only so much space we can accommodate. But I think the point we're trying to make, and Rich mentioned the safety location, we're trying to make the corridor safer. So, the amount of traffic is going to be the amount of traffic. We only have so many lanes we can add. We probably have to add 4 and 5 lanes at certain intersections. That's physically not possible. But I think our job is to optimize it, make it as most efficient as we can with the projected traffic, but also make it safe for everybody. So if we can eliminate all those bubbles that are safeties and crashes, I think that's, obviously our main goal is safety.
And that's a great point, Bill. When we have to make a judgment call between safety and accommodation, right? We're going to go for safety every day. Safety is paramount on projects like this. It's about safety. So now we grade intersections, they call it level of service. A is free flowing, F is just waiting in a traffic jam. And so if we have to sacrifice a little bit of level of service to improve safety, that's the key. Safety is always first. Safety is going to take precedent over anything else. And if you saw on that slide that I had, the 8 SIP locations, the high crash locations, this is a safety issue on this corridor. Now, are we going to improve other things? Absolutely. Whether it's transit, whether it's ADA accommodation, whether it's pedestrians, whether it's bikes, there's going to be a whole bunch of other great things that are included in this project. But we're always very mindful of safety first. Safety is the most important part of the project. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm an avid blind walker. The city is not fun. A couple of different things. Aaron, is there?
Yeah.
Is this part of the visual plan, or is this totally separate? Or does this fall under?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the question is this part of the broader transportation vision? You might be referencing the Safe Streets for People playbook process that we managed for about, I think it was about 12 to 18 months. To kind of articulate and understand essentially the needs based on high crash locations in the city. Western Ave is clearly, I think, the heavyweight champion when it comes to HIP locations, but the city generally has a real problem with high crash locations. It lights up like a Christmas tree. So there was a lot of work done to sort of look at the entire network in the city, sort of assess where those needs are and prioritize them. And so following the back end of that process, that study and public engagement that went along with that planning process, there was a prioritization of the corridors that really needed to be addressed first. There was 9 of them. Western Ave was, I think, number 1 of the 9. We didn't really rank those priorities, but Western Ave is definitely one of them. So yeah, it's certainly part of the vision to make Lynn safer for all users of transportation.
The other question I have is, you mentioned auto traffic lights.
Yep.
And bump ramps. Who is responsible for maintaining? Is that DOT? Is that the city?
After
After it's all done.
So this is a city, and MassDOT is building this, but it's a roadway that's under the jurisdiction of the city. So right now, I believe Inspectional Services manages the traffic signals?
Yeah, the signals are inspectional services, the roadway is DPW.
Okay, so to answer your question, yeah, the city will be required to maintain that, but again, all of this stuff is going to be brand new. So detectable warning panels, audible pedestrian buttons, and crossing equipment, that sort of stuff will be
And
important.
my last thing is, when you're placing your poles right now, you have your bump ramp over here, and you have your pole, which is not audible over here. So blind, deaf, whoever, somebody, any kind of disability has to go over here, hit the button. Now, as far as I know, there's only one audible traffic light, that's on the corner of 4th Street and Boston Street. And so when you hit the button, now, okay, I come over here, I hit the button, now I have to find the bumper. The pole is in the middle, so people don't, drivers don't know which way to go, and you have the right-hand turners, all of that, so
We're
it's.
going to fix this. We're going to fix that.
Yeah, because but if you could get the pole sort of near the ramp, that would be really helpful.
So there are standards for that, right now? I don't know if you want to-
Yeah, so I mean, the standards based off ADA, the push button has to be 10 inches from a level lane.
Okay.
So, which depends on the ramp, it might be right next to the ramp or,
Right.
it depends on if there's a lot of grade, so that you get a longer ramp. And that's a requirement, there's no leeway on that at all.
Because right now, I'm thinking of.
For new stuff.
Okay. Right now, I'm thinking the corner of Western and Chatham. I live up in Chatham. So the pole is over here, kind of in the middle of the two streets, it's over here.
Yeah.
There's no ramp, it's all chewed up sidewalk there. So just kind of hoping at some point you can like get it sorted together.
Yeah.
And if there's a 10-inch or 12, even if it's 2 feet, I mean, that's more than.
Well, the 10 inches with somebody in a wheelchair can get to it as well. And also the preference and the good design is to also have, if you have 2 crosswalks going 2 different ways, you have 2 different poles. You don't have them on the same pole. It's great if you can separate by 10 feet. And always happen just because of geometry. It makes it a lot clearer for everybody, what is.
I mean, drivers don't even know what's going on half the time.
Yeah.
It's not because they're not paying attention, it's just, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So all of the design aspects of this project, there are several standards that we have to comply with.
Right.
MassDOT's engineering design criteria, other documents, the manual on uniform traffic control devices, the ASHTO green book, there's ADA, all of these things. So as we're going through the design, all of those things have requirements that the project has to comply with. And if you can't, like I talked about one of those things earlier, like we can't put in a bike lane, the proper bike lane that is required, then we have to justify that design justification workbook you heard me talk about. But generally, a lot of these other things, similar to what you're talking about in terms of location of push buttons and where detectable warning panels are located and making sure certain things are on the level landing as opposed to on the ramp itself. Things like that, those are all regulated by the federal government or MassDOT.
Because the audible streetlights, you should be able to push a button, hold the button, and volume should increase. And the one that we have doesn't. Because if you have to pretty much sit on top of the pole, you have to sort of hear it.
Okay. So those are adjustable. The volume, it's supposed to automatically adjust based off ambient noise. But there's a range that they can be set to.
Right.
The newer ones, the one you're talking about based on.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So here's one of those things that, as we go through the process, so the button needs to be louder.
Right.
But there's people who live right there and the bedroom windows right next to where the
They
button
want to
is.
hear that thing.
And they don't want to, so these are the things that as we go through this process, this is why we need to be talking about this, because we want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure we're accommodating everybody to the maximum extent we can, but sometimes it's a balance, right? So those are the kind of things, but to your point, there's certain standards, actually to a certain standard, projects like this have multiple standards and we have to follow those as we go through this process.
Right, and I'm the MassDOT project manager, and we have detailed reviews for these things to all the traffic they all weigh in and we make sure that all the standards are followed, and if not, we get into detailed discussions about why, and there's a very rigorous process before things are not upon or signed off.
So this is John Freeman, he's the project manager from MassDOT. I didn't know if John, I don't know if you were incognito tonight, so I didn't want to kind of pull you out of the room, but, and so we've been working closely with John on this project, and again, you heard me mention all of these other people that weigh in. John just mentioned a bunch of them, and it's John's job to coordinate all of those efforts at MassDOT, so glad you're here tonight.
Thank you.
I didn't know, you know, that I know at least 400 visually impaired blind people in Lynn, but you don't see them because it's not safe.
Right.
So, once this happens, it's just like this thing,
Yeah, no, it's good. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to follow on her questions, and she took a bunch of mine, so thank you. Sorry. That's okay. At the crosswalks that are not at a light, there will be a button there for crossing.
So some crosswalks will have, will be obviously a signalized intersection crosswalks for sure. There'll be other crosswalks at locations along Western Ave. And then some of those crosswalks may have sort of the flashing beacon, depending upon the frequency of how many people are crossing, where it is. It's always important, one of the things that's important about crosswalks is the frequency of crosswalks. If you go up to Woodbridgeport, there's a crosswalk like every 20 feet, and then people end up ignoring it. So we want to make sure that the crosswalks are in appropriate locations, and that the frequency works so that we're getting people across the street safely. And if it's a location where there's a high frequency of crossing, then we may need to consider whether we should put a flashing beacon there.
Textured mats on the curb cuts.
That will be some of the stuff that we'll talk about at 75%.
Okay, so I was going to say some of my questions might be a little ahead of time. Places along the road where the telephone pole is in the middle of the sidewalk, so when I'm in a chair, I have to go on someone's grass.
Yeah, we're not gonna do that. So ADA, for example, has special requirements in terms of clear path of travel. Right? So you can't have a utility pole that's in the middle of the sidewalk and then you can't get by. And here's the other thing. If the city is plowing sidewalks, right, doing with sidewalk plow, well, you can't have a pole in the middle of the sidewalk. That doesn't work either. So all of those things, all of those things get corrected.
Right, we have to have 3 feet of clearance in even around obstacles, and we have to have, we prefer 5 feet and require 5 feet every 200 linear feet.
And then I'm going to make a suggestion.
Okay.
And Rick can get me if he needs to. When you're at 75%, instead of, this happens in all construction jobs, instead of saying, I should address this to you,
Sure.
instead of saying, okay, everything is ADA accessible, ADA accessible does not always mean usable. So when you're at 75%, you need to get somebody who uses those sidewalks in a chair to go around with you.
That's a good suggestion.
Because ADA doesn't always mean usable.
Sure. That's a great suggestion. And as John mentioned, there is a whole section of professionals at DOT, and that's all they deal with.
Yeah,
But
so
even
ADA people are extremely strict at DOT, and there are things that I think are even stricter than they need to be, and they won't let anything pass.
But DOT and these groups don't always do they always do it's ADA accessible.
Sure.
And ADA accessible does not always mean usable, and I just want to put that out there.
Aaron, is there an ADA coordinator in the state?
Not that I'm aware of.
There is a commission on disability that isn't fully running right now.
That's just on paper though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm thinking it is, yes.
So we'll want to
That's a really great suggestion, because I think as we move forward into the design, we've already heard some really great detailed comments tonight about how ADA accessibility is currently, where it can be, where it might be improved beyond what is required. So we'll work with World Tech to figure out a way to engage, whether it's through the commission, if we can reinvigorate the commission maybe, or just reach out to commission members and have a special stakeholder meeting to kind of talk through the details. we're happy to accommodate that.
And then my other question, because, and this may be a you guys, not you question. Where does the town expect we came from a town. Where does the city expect for wheelchairs, this is a technical question, for wheelchairs to be? On the street or on the sidewalk?
Sidewalks.
How come police stop you and tell you that the sidewalk is for walkers? I've had 3 times in Lynn. I've been told to get off the sidewalk, so can we clarify? Just somewhere to be clear.
Well, there's a difference between bicycles and wheelchairs. Bicycles can't necessarily be on the sidewalk in central business districts, but wheelchairs can.
Police say the sidewalk is for walk.
That's wrong.
Okay, I just wanted it clear.
And I don't want to raise issues with the police, but maybe you can, Aaron.
We'll follow up, Rick.
I mean, I use a power wheelchair, so that may be a difference, but that needs to be.
It is, it should be.
Right, but I just want to make sure that that's addressed in all of this.
Just to show some new handicap ramps they're replacing at different intersections. I know that this is Holyoke and Myrtle, and it's for people to get up onto the side.
The new ones they just did from Buchanan to Walmart, there's several that you have to, the brand new ones, there are several when you get on. Like you said, you almost have to get in the street to turn, and that's where I want to make sure the usable versus ADA compliant, because those are ADA compliant, but why should I have to turn in the street?
So, and by the way, just so you know, that section of Route 107 is state highway. And
Yes.
MassDOT currently has that under design as well.
Yeah.
We're not doing it.
But they are technically ADA compliant, but they're not usable.
Where is this?
Where?
From,
North of Buchanan Bridge.
Okay.
they just get on the, coming from Buchanan on the left-hand side.
That is state. Once you cross
Yeah.
the bridge, it becomes state. So.
Other questions? I have a question. Are we excited about this?
Yes.
Yes.
Very cool, right? Yeah, all good, right? So, we're also, just as a sidebar, not associated with this project, but we're also in the middle of the design of Essex Street. It's a TIP project. I think it's on the tip for 17 million and change. Another exciting project for the city. That project will go from Eastern Ave all the way to Rockaway and Joyce Street downtown. And includes that whole triangle around the Fayette Street Fire Station, extends down towards Union Street, so another great project for the city, so stay tuned for that.
I know you guys talked about it, but when does what point does the MBTA stuff get involved?
Well, once we get a little bit further with identifying what that alignment looks like, we'll start having
That
conversations.
really needs to be discussed on the corner of Eastern and Western.
Yeah.
Rick will tell you, I've been a pain in the ass over this, I'll be the first one to admit it. There are way too many bus stops with way too much, I
They
don't know
told
the
me they
word.
had a work order in for that to handle it.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of that is consolidating bus stops and that sort of thing. Those are the discussions we'll have with the MBTA. I know the planning department in Lynn has already been talking to the MBTA about things like improving transit operations and that sort of thing. So we'll be looking at that. I have a question for everybody. Again, from Lynn, born and raised in Lynn, but why does Western Ave and Eastern Ave, why are they perpendicular to each other?
Why do they what?
They're perpendicular to each other. It should be parallel, right?
They follow the roads, like it's so crazy, they follow the original roads way back when we had those.
Yeah. So one last thing, you see the website address right there, www.linnincommon.com/Western Avenue. There's lots of information on there. We'll be continuing to update information on that site. We'll be working with Jason and his team at Regina Villa to keep the information flowing. Also, the planning department will be updating information as well. Pass the word along that this is a great project. We hope that our next community meeting, we have more of you there so that we can continue to talk about the project.
Rich, can I just make one last plug? I know you plugged it already, but the web link is on the screen for the project. the LynnDepartment.com, I really encourage you, if you're interested in following these projects, the Essex Street project, you can register and we'll send you email updates. We do a monthly newsletter. So as these public hearings get scheduled, if you're signed up, you'll hear about it and know about it, so you can be aware and get involved. So a lot of these detailed points you're making tonight are really important for that design process.
So, I want to thank councilors for being here tonight, and Mayor Nicholson, and John from MassDOT, thank you for being here. And stay tuned, there'll be more to come, so thank you all for coming.